The message arrived just as I was setting the table for dinner. She needs our support. I'm already moving in with her and have emptied our joint account. Haha. Oddly, my hands didn't tremble when I read it. My voice didn't crack when I called my son down for dinner. The only sign that my husband of 14 years had just demolished our marriage with one careless text was the deliberate, slow way I set my phone down. I stared at the words, "She needs our support." Then came the final blow. A second message that made my stomach lurch. Despite my best attempts to stay composed, the words still hit hard. "She's pregnant, Madison. We have to be there for her. I know this is a lot to process, but we can be adults about this. Pregnant." A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, drowning out the sound of my son humming in the background. I focused on my breathing, forcing myself to stay still and think. Avery, my sister, 9 years younger, the baby of our family, the one I practically raised after our mother passed away, and my husband. I'd spent years loving and trusting them both, only to discover that they had been secretly building something of their own behind my back. I continued setting the table, my movements robotic. The warm glow of the dining room lights, the scent of roasted chicken, my son's innocent voice, everything felt so ordinary, as though my world hadn't just crumbled in a single crushing moment. I typed my response. Congratulations. No anger, no emotion, just that one word. If Daniel thought I would break down, beg, or scream, he was in for a rude awakening. Looking back, the signs had been there, subtle but undeniable. The late nights at work, the way he'd started being extra generous with Avery, offering to help her move into her new place, checking in on her constantly. Avery had even joked about how lucky she was to have Daniel in her life, saying, "Not every brother-in-law is this supportive, you know." I never questioned it. Why would I? Daniel and I had built a life together, home, family, future. We had a 12-year-old son who adored his father. I trusted him, and I trusted Avery. After all, she was family. Family doesn't betray you until they do. The betrayal didn't break me. I was already 2 steps ahead. 3 months ago, I had found something. A receipt tucked into Daniel's jacket pocket. A hotel charge from a night he claimed to be out with friends. That was the first crack in our foundation. Instead of confronting him, I did something smarter. I prepared. While Daniel worked late, I quietly rerouted my personal savings into a separate account. I left just enough in the joint account to keep him from getting suspicious. I even reviewed our credit card statements, finding more than one questionable charge: flowers, jewelry, hotel rooms. I'd suspected an affair, but I never could have imagined this. Now, Daniel thought he had emptied our joint account, that he had won. He was about to learn the truth. The money he drained? It wasn't much. The house he thought he could walk away from? It was in my name. The future he'd stolen? It was never his to take. That night, after putting my son to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine, one of the expensive bottles Daniel had been saving for a special occasion. This seemed as fitting as anything. My phone buzzed again. "I know this is hard for you, but Avery is young." She was scared. "It just happened. We never meant for it to go this far. Please don't make this ugly." I actually laughed. Ugly? He thought I was the one making it ugly? I took a slow sip of my wine before forwarding the message to my lawyer, the one I'd quietly retained 2 months ago. Then I picked up my phone and typed my reply. "I understand. You're right. She needs your support. Take care of her." And then I waited. Waited for Daniel to realize the trap he had walked into. While he celebrated his new life, thinking he had gotten away with betraying his wife and family, he had no idea that by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late. Daniel didn't respond to my last message. Maybe he was expecting more anger, tears, a desperate plea for him to reconsider. But I gave him nothing, just a simple take care of her. I imagined him staring at his phone, waiting for me to fall apart, but I had already set my plan in motion. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had happened. My son, Lucas, was my priority. "Where's Dad?" he asked as I packed his lunch for school. I smiled, keeping my voice calm. He had to go help Aunt Avery with something. It wasn't a lie. Lucas shrugged, too busy grabbing his backpack to question it. He didn't need to know the details. Not yet. As soon as he was out the door, I made my first call. "It's time," I told my lawyer. She had been expecting this. We'd been preparing for months. Step 1. Freeze all shared accounts. Daniel thought he had drained our finances, but the real money was untouched. Step 2. Lock him out of the house. It was in my name. Always had been. Daniel had pushed to put his name on the deed last year, but I'd brushed it off, saying we'd handle it later. Now, later was never coming. The locksmith arrived within the hour. I watched as the keys to our front door became completely useless in Daniel's hands. By noon, I had already filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Daniel still hadn't reached out. Maybe he thought I was somewhere curled up in tears, quietly processing everything while he played house with my sister. I let him keep that illusion for just a little longer. That afternoon, as I reviewed legal documents, my phone buzzed. Avery. I hesitated before answering. Madison. Her voice was shaky. Please don't hate me. I took a deep breath. I don't hate you, Avery, I said. That was the truth. She had no idea what kind of mess she'd gotten herself tangled in. Daniel told me you said to take care of me, she continued, her voice trembling. Does that mean you forgive us? I almost laughed. Forgive? Daniel had carefully groomed her into believing he was her knight in shining armor, the one she needed. He had whispered promises of love while lying next to me in our bed, and now she was left holding the mess he'd made. Of course, I said smoothly. You'll see for yourself soon enough. A brief pause. I wanted to talk to you before you hear it from someone else, she stammered. Daniel wants to move into my apartment, but it's so small. He said maybe we could. There it was. Daniel's plan had never been about owning up to anything. He was banking on moving back into my house, the one I owned, and pretending it was all for Avery's sake. They expected me to welcome him back. I bit back a smile. I'm glad you called, I said. But Daniel won't be moving back here. A heavy silence filled the line. What do you mean? She whispered. I glanced over at the newly replaced locks. I mean, he doesn't live here anymore. Her breath hitched. She didn't know. Daniel had never told her that the house was mine, that he had no claim to it. I could hear her shift the phone, turning away from it. Then she muttered in a low voice, Daniel? What does she mean? I could picture it perfectly. Daniel standing frozen, his face contorting in shock as he realized I had already cut him off. That's when I ended the call. A few hours later, Daniel finally texted, What the hell, Madison? You changed the locks. I let him stew for a moment. The next text came just minutes later. You can't do this. I need to come back and get my stuff. You're being dramatic. His stuff, not our stuff. The nerve made me laugh. I replied, Oh, I didn't change the locks. The owner of the house did. I could practically hear him fuming through the screen as he tried calling me. I ignored it. Then another message popped up. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I smiled as my fingers hovered over the keyboard. No, Daniel, I typed. I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be. That evening, Lucas asked if his dad would be home for dinner. I knelt beside him, gently brushing a strand of hair from his face. Daddy's staying with Aunt Avery for a little while, I said, keeping my tone calm. His brows furrowed. Why? How do you explain betrayal to a 12-year-old without breaking his heart? I kissed his forehead, looking him in the eyes. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, I said carefully. And when they do, they have to live with the consequences. He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Okay. A simple word, but it carried 1,000 meanings. Later that night, I received one last message from Daniel. We need to talk. I turned off my phone. For once, in our marriage, he was the one who needed me, and I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore. This was only the beginning. Daniel had always assumed he was untouchable. He thought he could lie, cheat, and take whatever wasn't his without any repercussions. Today, that illusion would come crashing down. The first call came at 8:12 a.m. I let it ring out. Then a text. You froze the accounts. How could you? Avery and I need that money. I took a sip of coffee, glancing at the message before setting my phone down. He was panicking. I could picture him now, desperately checking his banking app, realizing that while he thought he had emptied our joint account, he had actually only taken a few pennies compared to what I had quietly moved months ago. Another call. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another text. You can't just leave us with nothing. Avery's pregnant, Madison. We're starting a family. I almost laughed. Daniel had abandoned his first family without a second thought, and now he expected sympathy for creating a new one. He wasn't asking for support. He was demanding a bailout. At 10 a.m., my lawyer called. Daniel's attorney reached out. He's claiming you acted maliciously by freezing the accounts. I smirked. Did you remind them I did it legally? She chuckled. Of course, and that the house was never his. Seems that was a surprise to him. Let him be surprised, I said, swirling my coffee. It's about time he learned that actions have consequences. She paused. There's something else. Daniel tried to withdraw money from his personal accounts this morning. Apparently, his credit cards are maxed out. I raised an eyebrow. So, he thought he could live off my money while playing happy family with Avery? I shook my head. Good. Daniel had lived recklessly for years, spending money like it would never run out. Expensive watches, lavish trips with his friends, a leased sports car. But now, none of that mattered. He wasn't my problem anymore. At noon, Avery called again. I hesitated before answering, then pressed the button. Madison, please talk to him. I stayed silent. He didn't know you were going to do all of this, she continued, her voice on the edge of cracking. He thought, what? I interrupted. You thought Daniel could cheat, steal, and still walk away with my home, my money, my life? Avery sniffled on the other end. We're having a baby, she said, her voice small, and I could hear the desperation in her tone. And that's my problem? I asked, my voice cool. There was a pause. Then quietly, she admitted, Daniel told me he had everything under control, that we wouldn't struggle. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Avery was young, naive, and had been foolish, but I wasn't interested in punishing her. You made your choice, Avery, I said, and now you have to live with it. She started crying. I don't know what to do. We don't even have a place to stay. My lease is up next month, and Daniel said. She trailed off. Daniel said what? I asked, my voice sharp. Silence hung in the air for a moment. I already knew what Daniel had promised her. The house. That's why he wasn't truly worried. He had assumed he could waltz back in, bring his new family with him, and I would just accept it. I laughed under my breath. You're going to have to figure it out, Avery, I said finally, my tone steady. Just like I did. Then, without waiting for a response, I hung up. At 3 p.m., Daniel finally showed up at my doorstep, banging on the door. Madison, open up, he demanded, his voice frantic. I let him knock for a while, then opened the door just enough to look at him, but not enough to let him in. His face was flushed, his hair a mess. He wasn't the arrogant man who had sent me that smug text just days ago. Now, he was desperate. You need to let me in, he insisted, his voice tight with urgency. No, I said simply. His jaw clenched. Madison, don't do this. Avery and I are about to have a baby. You're punishing us for something that just happened. You think this is punishment? I raised an eyebrow. No, Daniel. This is simply you getting exactly what you deserve. His expression twisted. I knew you'd be vindictive, he sneered. You thought I'd be weak, I shot back. He scoffed. You can't just throw me out like trash. I was your husband for 14 years, and you threw it all away for a fling with my sister. He flinched when I said it, but I stood my ground. You made your choices, Daniel, and now you get to live with them, just like Avery does. I started to close the door, but his next words stopped me. I'll fight for the house. I have rights. I smiled, knowing he still didn't get it. You don't have a leg to stand on, Daniel. The house was mine before we ever got married. It's not a marital asset. And thanks to the divorce paperwork I already filed, the courts will see that you abandoned our marriage for another woman. His face went pale. He hadn't expected me to act so quickly. I tilted my head, then added, but go ahead. Hire a lawyer. See how that works out for you. Oh, wait. I gave him a mocking smile. You can't afford one, can you? His nostrils flared, and I could see the rage building inside him. Fists clenched, he stood there, seething. It was the moment when I knew he realized he had played himself. You're going to regret this, he muttered. Doubt it, I replied coolly, then shut the door in his face. That night, as I sipped another glass of wine, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. Daniel's attorney has officially acknowledged the divorce filing. Also, they're requesting a meeting. Seems like Daniel is struggling. I smiled. This was just the beginning. Daniel thought he could betray me, steal from me, and walk away unscathed. But I had planned for this every step of the way. By the time he realized how far ahead I was, it would already be too late. Daniel was losing control, and I was savoring every second of it. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office reviewing documents. Daniel is scrambling, she said, flipping through the paperwork. His attorney is already asking about mediation, which means he knows he doesn't have much to fight with. I smirked. I assume they're hoping I'll be reasonable. She nodded. They'll likely push for some kind of financial settlement, but given that he abandoned the marriage and committed adultery, the courts won't be in his favor. Good. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I had spent years compromising, sacrificing, trying to make things work with Daniel. Now? I owed him nothing. By noon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Expecting another legal update, I answered. Instead, Avery's frantic voice came through. Madison, she gasped. He's losing it. He's talking about suing you for financial damages. He's saying you ruined his life. I stifled a laugh. I ruined his life? He's broke, I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. She continued, her voice shaky. He tried to use one of his credit cards this morning, and it got declined. When he called the bank, they told him he had overdraft fees. He's blaming me, Madison. Of course he is. Daniel had never taken responsibility for anything in his life. I sighed, keeping my tone eerily calm. What do you expect me to do? She hesitated. I don't know, but I'm scared. He's different now. He's not the same Daniel. He yells, he blames me for everything. He keeps saying that if I hadn't gotten pregnant, none of this would be happening. There it was, the ugly truth. She hadn't been ready to see it. Daniel never loved you, I said, my voice softening. You were a mistake he's trying to undo. Silence followed, then a quiet sniffle. I think I made a mistake, she admitted, barely above a whisper. I thought to myself, no, you made several mistakes, but I didn't say it. Instead, I kept my voice steady. You need to figure out what's best for you and the baby. She let out a shaky breath. I don't even know where to go. My apartment lease is almost up, and Daniel was supposed to handle everything. He said we'd be okay. I almost pitied her. Almost. But she wasn't my responsibility anymore. She made her choice, and now she had to live with it. I have to go, Avery, I said simply. Take care of yourself. And with that, I hung up. By 4 p.m., Daniel tried calling again. I ignored it. Seconds later, a text came through. You've made your point, Madison. Now let's be adults about this. Oh, now he wanted to be an adult? I rolled my eyes. Then another text. Look, we don't have to make this a war. Just let me come back and talk. I need a place to stay while I figure things out. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered. I remembered the laugh at the end of his first text. I remembered the hotel receipts, the secret gifts, the betrayal. I remembered how he had dismissed me like I was nothing. And suddenly, I didn't feel bad at all. I typed a single response. Figure it out yourself. Then I blocked his number. That night, my lawyer sent me an update that was almost too delightful to believe. Daniel had officially lost access to the last of our joint assets. His lawyer had requested a meeting. They wanted to negotiate. I smirked. He thought he had options, but he didn't realize I was already 5 steps ahead. Daniel was unraveling faster than I had expected. I had thought he would struggle, stumble through the mess he created, but I hadn't anticipated how quickly his world would come crashing down. I watched from a distance, knowing his downfall was entirely of his own making. He was about to hit rock bottom, and it was only a matter of time. At 7:30 a.m., my lawyer called, barely able to contain her laughter. You're not going to believe this, she said, almost chuckling. I took a sip of my coffee. Try me. Daniel is being evicted. I nearly choked. Evicted from where? Avery's apartment, she explained. Apparently the lease is only in her name, And since she hasn't been able to keep up with the rent, the landlord served them an eviction notice last night. I let out a low whistle. So they're both homeless? Looks like it, she replied. Daniel must have assumed he could live off of you forever. He clearly wasn't planning on supporting Avery. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. He had abandoned his home, his family, and his entire life for my sister, only to find himself without a roof over his head. It was almost poetic. By 9 a.m., I received a call from an unknown number. I answered, already suspecting who it was. Sure enough, Daniel's voice came through the speaker. You had no right to do this to me, he said, his voice dripping with anger. I smirked. Do what, Daniel? Leave you to deal with the mess you created? You froze the accounts, took the house, and left me with nothing. He spat. I don't even have a place to sleep tonight. Do you even care? I rolled my eyes. Daniel, I stopped caring the moment you packed your bags and ran off to my sister. He let out a bitter laugh. You act like I planned for this to happen. Didn't you? I challenged him. You thought you could run off, build a perfect life with Avery, and still come crawling back when you needed something. You thought you could cheat, steal, and destroy our marriage without consequences. There was silence on the other end. Well, guess what? I continued, my voice sharp. You don't get to play the victim now. Daniel exhaled harshly. Madison, listen. She's not what I thought she was. She's immature. She doesn't understand how hard life is. I smirked. So, it had finally happened. You realized Avery wasn't the fantasy escape you thought she was. She's just a young, naive woman who had no idea what she was getting into. She's pregnant, I reminded him. This is what you wanted, remember? He groaned. She wants me to find a way to fix everything, like I have some kind of magic wand. She doesn't get it. We have no money, no home, no future. I cut him off. And whose fault is that? He didn't answer. I smiled, shaking my head. You know what's funny, Daniel? You thought Avery was an upgrade. You thought she was better than me, more exciting, younger, easier. But the moment things got tough, she turned to you to solve it. And guess what? I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. You were never the kind of man who could solve anything. His breath hitched. Madison, please just let me come back. Just for a little while. I need time to figure things out. I laughed out loud. You seriously think I'd let you step foot in my house again? I said. You're delusional. Madison, don't do this. You're not like this. I smirked. You never really knew me, Daniel. And with that, I hung up. By noon, I received a text from Avery. I don't know what to do. Daniel left. He just walked out. He said he needed space to think. I stared at the message. So Daniel had abandoned her too. It was only a matter of time. He never wanted responsibility. Not for me, not for Lucas, and certainly not for a pregnant 25-year-old with no money. I let the text sit there for a moment before typing my response. Now you know what it feels like. And with that, I left it at that. At 6 p.m., I sat at my kitchen table, sipping a well-deserved glass of wine. My lawyer had officially finalized the divorce terms. Daniel had nothing. No house, no money, no credit, no safety net. He had lost everything. And me? I had gained peace. As I glanced at my phone, I couldn't help but smile. I saw one last notification, a voicemail from Daniel. I didn't bother listening to it. Instead, I deleted it without hesitation. For the first time in 14 years, Daniel was no longer my problem. The last traces of his presence in my life were erased, divorce papers signed, the house officially mine, and the money he thought he had stolen frozen and reclaimed. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time in more than a decade, I was truly free, and I had never felt stronger. 3 weeks had passed since Daniel's last attempt to reach out. Not a word from him since. Through a few mutual connections, I knew he was drifting from couch to couch, his old friends rapidly tiring of his presence. His savings were gone. His credit was in ruins. His job prospects? Non-existent. He had burned every bridge, and now he was drowning. Meanwhile, I was flourishing. At 10 a.m., I walked into my boutique, the very same business Daniel had once mocked as a little hobby, and greeted my employees with a smile that radiated pride. Business was booming. In fact, I was in the process of expanding, actively scouting for locations for a second store. My real success didn't come from what I had built with Daniel, but from finally deciding to stop shrinking myself to fit into a life with a man who never truly deserved me. By noon, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Just a heads up, Daniel filed an appeal to revisit the financial settlement. The judge dismissed it immediately. He was also ordered to pay court costs. A smug smile spread across my face. Even as everything fell apart for him, he was still clinging to old habits, trying to manipulate his way back in. But this time, no one was coming to save him. Later that afternoon, while I was deep into finalizing my new business plans, my phone lit up with a text from an unexpected name, Avery. I hesitated for a second, but my curiosity won out. I answered with a simple, yes. Her voice trembled. I just wanted to say you were right. I leaned back in my chair. About what? About Daniel, she confessed. He left. Told me he wasn't ready to be a father and that I should have been smarter about birth control. I clenched my jaw. Of course he did. Daniel had spent years pointing the finger at me, and now Avery was taking the brunt of his misplaced blame. She sniffled. I thought he loved me. But I was just used. Now I'm pregnant, alone, and I have no idea how I'm going to manage all of this. I let out a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. I feel sorry for you, Avery, I said, my voice steady. But I don't owe you anything. She let out a shaky breath, and her voice cracked. I know. I needed you to know. I regret everything. I ruined my relationship with you for a man who never even cared about me. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I spoke. I hope you learn from this. Then I ended the call. Avery would figure it out, just as I had. At 6 p.m., I was preparing to close up the boutique when my assistant walked in, her face betraying her amusement. You're not going to believe who I just saw outside, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Who? Daniel, she replied, shaking her head. He was across the street, just staring at the store. I blinked. He came here? She nodded. He looked awful, Madison, unshaven, wearing the same clothes from days ago. He looked lost. I glanced toward the window, but he was already gone. Still, I knew exactly what had happened. He was finally facing the consequences of what he'd thrown away, the life of comfort, the stability, the success, the woman who had stood by him for over a decade. And now, he had nothing. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sank into the couch, staring at my phone. Daniel's number was still blocked, and I had no intention of ever unblocking it. Instead, I opened my laptop, browsing locations for my second boutique. A smile tugged at my lips. This? This was what moving on looked like. Not revenge, not anger, not waiting for an apology that would never come. Just building something better. Because while Daniel was lost in the wreckage of his past, I was thriving in the promise of my future. And not once did I look back.